Picture this. The year is 1565. The tiny island of Malta is about to become the stage for one of the most epic, most unbelievable showdowns in all of history. We're talking about a battle that would pit a handful of determined defenders against the single most powerful empire on the planet. And hey, don't just take my word for it. When a guy like the great philosopher Voltaire says that nothing is more famous in history than this siege, you know it was a really big deal. This one battle sent shockwaves across the entire 16th century world, and its outcome would echo for generations. So how did we get here? To really get what this siege was all about, you have to understand the Mediterranean back in the 1500s. It wasn't a peaceful place. It was basically a powder keg, dominated by two massive powers on a collision course. Okay, so in one corner, you've got the heavyweight champion of the world, the Ottoman Empire, led by the legendary Suleiman the Magnificent. They were at the absolute peak of their power, a seemingly unstoppable force. And in the other corner, the Knights of St. John. Now, these guys weren't just any soldiers. They were the Knights Hospitaller, an order of warrior monks. But here's the kicker. They were exiles, nursing a massive grudge after being booted from their last home. You see, this wasn't their first rodeo. This was the big rematch, decades in the making. Back in 1522, Suleiman himself had led the siege that kicked the Knights out of Rhodes. So Christian Europe gave them a new home, the barren rock of Malta. And what did the Knights do? They got right back to business, raiding Ottoman ships. By 1564, they were so bold, stealing treasure, capturing important people, that Suleiman had had enough. For him, this was personal. The Knights had to be wiped off the map for good. And so the Sultan put together an invasion force so massive it's almost hard to believe. What came next was a confrontation so lopsided it looked like it was going to be a complete massacre. This was a true David versus Goliath story. Get this. An armada of over 150 ships set sail from Malta. This was the largest naval force the Mediterranean had seen in centuries, maybe since the Roman Empire. And on those ships, something like 40,000 of the Ottoman Empire's absolute best soldiers. We're talking about the Janissaries. Think of them as the Sultan's personal special forces, an elite, feared, and brutally effective fighting machine. And who was standing in their way? Just 9,000 defenders. And get this, only about 600 of them were actual knights. The rest were a mix of professional soldiers and thousands of everyday Maltese men who grabbed whatever they could to defend their homes. In some places, they were outnumbered more than 10 to 1. It's just insane. Yeah, this chart really says it all, doesn't it? The sheer mismatch in forces is staggering. The question buzzing around Europe wasn't if Malta would fall, it was just a matter of how many days it would take. But they didn't fall. What was supposed to be a quick invasion turned into a brutal 4-month slugfest, and they achieved the impossible. But let me be clear, this wasn't just luck. This was a masterclass in strategy, resilience, and turning every single one of your enemy's mistakes into an advantage. So how on earth did they do it? Well, it really boiled down to 3 key things that totally flipped the script. A brilliant trap, absolute chaos in the enemy command, and just pure, unbreakable will. Okay, first step, the trap at Fort St. Elmo. The Ottomans saw this small fort and figured, no problem, we'll take it in a week, tops. But the Knights were playing chess, not checkers. They turned that fort into a sacrificial pawn. They fought for every single inch of it for over a month. This heroic delay cost the Ottomans not just precious time, but more than 6,000 of their best troops. They bled the enemy dry before the main fight had even really started. Next up, leadership. For the defenders, it was simple. They had one man in charge, the 70-year-old Grandmaster Jean de Valette. He was tough as nails, inspirational, a total rock. The Ottoman side? A complete mess. Their commanders, Mustafa Pasha and Piali Pasha, argued about everything. And then, their best strategist, Dragut, was killed by a stray cannonball. After that, their command structure just fell apart into chaos. And finally, you had the defenders' sheer ingenuity. This stuff must have driven the Ottomans mad. Every day, Ottoman cannons would pound the walls to rubble, and every night, Maltese civilians would come out and tirelessly rebuild them. The defenders expertly used their own cannons to take out the Ottoman artillery. And let's not forget the local Maltese, who knew every trail and crevice, launching guerrilla raids and making the invaders' lives an absolute hell. But an incredible victory like this, it always comes at a price. A heavy one. After 4 brutal months, the Ottomans finally gave up and sailed away.
But the island was scarred, and the human cost was just devastating.
For the Ottomans, it was a catastrophe. Some estimates say they lost as many as 35,000 men to battle and disease. It was a staggering blow. But the defenders paid in blood too. About a third of their fighting force, knights, soldiers, and thousands of Maltese civilians, lost their lives. Now, this chart tells such a cool story of resilience. After all that devastation, you'd think the population would just collapse. But look at that trend right after 1565. It doesn't just recover, it shoots upward. The victory gave the island a new sense of security and purpose, and people started flocking there. But the real impact was felt far beyond the shores of Malta, because the big takeaway here is this. The myth of the invincible Ottoman Empire had been stopped cold. For decades, they had seemed unstoppable, and this tiny island proved they could be beaten. For the rest of Europe, the psychological impact of that was immeasurable. And that brings us to the ultimate legacy of the Great Siege. Now, the Ottoman Empire was still a huge power for a long time after this, but 1565 was a turning point. It was proof that a determined defense, smart strategy, and an unbreakable spirit could halt the tide. So it leaves us with one heck of a question. Was this the moment the world realized that even the greatest empires have their limits?